You're listening to the Cyberwire Network, powered by N2K.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Forget the frustration of picking commerce platforms when you switch your business to Shopify, the global commerce platform that supercharges your selling wherever you sell. With Shopify, you'll harness the same intuitive features, trusted apps, and powerful analytics used by the world's leading brands. Sign up today for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/tech, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/tech.
We can't expect every sitting member of Congress to be an expert in cybersecurity. But what I think that we should expect is the expectation that they're not going to demonize the tech sector and actually learn to collaborate and create partnerships. I think that is first and foremost, just because, if we don't have right fit policy, then we're, no longer going to be a global power, whether that be from an economic perspective, and risk leaving a lot of people behind just because we don't understand how to build modern policy.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Caveat, N2K Cyberwire's privacy surveillance law and policy podcast. I'm Dave Bittner, and joining me, as always, is my co-host Ben Yellen from the University of Maryland Center for Health and Homeland Security. Hey there, Ben.
Hello, Dave.
On today's show, Ben has an update on TikTok's lawsuit against the federal government. I look at the latest ruling on privacy rights at the border. And later in the show, Ben's conversation with U.S. congressional candidate from Oklahoma, Madison Horn, speaking with Ben about national security and cyber warfare. While this show covers legal topics and Ben is a lawyer, the views expressed do not constitute legal advice. For official legal advice on any of the topics we cover, please contact your attorney. Most of our listeners who deal with legacy privileged access management products know they tend to be expensive, difficult to deploy, and hard to use. Keeper Security is the answer. Keeper's Zero Trust solution delivers password, secrets, and connection management in one easy-to-use platform. It's fast to deploy, agentless, clientless, and has no implementation fees. Plus, Keeper is FedRAMP authorized. That's why we trust Keeper to prevent breaches and gain full control over privileged users. Visit keeper.io/cyberwire to schedule a quick demo. That's keeper.io/cyberwire. And thanks to Keeper Security for supporting our podcast. All right, Ben, before we get to our stories here, I had a funny thought that crossed my mind in the past week or so. It was actually triggered by a conversation I had with somebody over on Mastodon. And they were...
The good place, as it were.
The good place, that's right. The good online platform. Mm-hmm. They were expressing something that you and I have been in agreement on and expressed doubt about, which is why the FCC defers to law enforcement when it comes to Stingray devices. That we have this device that is basically designed to interfere with wireless communications, and the FCC is okay with that because it's being used for law enforcement. So what I'm curious about is, we've been talking about the Supreme Court's ruling, meaning that we're doing away with Chevron deference. Could that affect the FCC's ability to be deferential to law enforcement when it comes to stingrays?
So there are a bunch of things I would say to that. I think we have to go through a multi-step process to answer that question. Just because Chevron was reversed, you still have to establish a bunch of things to have a successful lawsuit. So first of all, you have to have somebody with standing. So it would have to be somebody who was convicted probably on evidence obtained from a Stingray device. Mm-hmm. And then that action would have to somehow be traceable to an FCC policy decision, which in this case would be deference to Stingray devices, or deference to Stingray devices, not subject to the type of federal regulation you'd normally see. So that traceability could be very difficult to prove. I do think if you could get over those pretty high hurdles, you'd get to a pretty interesting place. if you were to take, and granted, I have not read the statute word for word, so I'm kind of guesstimating on this, but if you were to read the authorizing statute for the FCC and its regulation of bandwidth, I do not think there are any carve-out exceptions specifically for Stingray devices.
Right.
So from a Chevron perspective, the agency would not be able to interpret the FCC statutory language in such a way that has that exclusion, because that would be an impermissible interpretation of the statute. It would stray too far away from the text of the authorizing statute.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just kind of expressing doubt in my own head, because the Supreme Court can come up to whatever conclusion it wants to come to.
Right.
And ultimately, what Chevron really means is that the Supreme Court itself will interpret what the statute means. And I don't know how specifically they feel about Stingray devices. If there's a conclusion that they find compelling, I'm sure they'll figure out a way to get there.
Yeah.
So with all of those caveats, so to speak, I do think it's something that's interesting and something we could pay attention to.
Yeah, just real quick. I mean, talking about standing. I'm walking down the street, minding my own business, and I happen into a zone where a Stingray is being used, and I notice that something goes wonky on my phone, or I try to make a call and it doesn't go through. Do I have standing?
No.
I didn't think so.
Yeah, because that does not qualify as an injury in fact.
Okay.
And there's not any type of redressability, which is a huge element of standing. There's nothing the government could do to undo that or to make you whole after that terrible experience that you would have suffered. So those are two prongs of the standing test that fail right away there.
Right.
So really, I think it would have to be somebody who was convicted as a result of evidence obtained through the use of a Stingray device, and that was traceable to an FCC decision or regulation.
What if somebody tried to make a 911 call and it didn't go through because the Stingray device was blocking it, and somebody died?
Now, that is very interesting. If you could prove that level of traceability, then I think you could establish standing.
Okay.
It would be very, very difficult to prove. There are a lot of reasons why 911 calls won't go through.
Yeah.
So that would involve a lot of discovery, and you'd have to have a lot of technical experts being like, here's exactly why this call didn't connect. And surprise, surprise, it had to do with the use of a Stingray device.
Yeah, so it stays
it's possible.
Stays in the theoretical category, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Interesting. All right. Well, thank you for indulging me as I went down that hypothetical pathway.
No, that's a fun rabbit hole. I'm glad we got to it.
All right. Well, let's get to our proper stories here. Why don't you kick things off for us?
So, among our many legions of fans, the question I get asked most when I'm talking about this podcast is, what is going to happen to TikTok? Congress passed this law saying that TikTok and its parent company ByteDance have to sell to some type of American entity prior to January 20th, 2025, lest it be banned in the United States, meaning it cannot be sold on either of the major app store platforms. Several plaintiffs, many expressing explicit First Amendment interests related to the freedom of speech and expression, have filed a lawsuit seeking to enjoin the enforcement of this law. They are joined by TikTok's parent company, ByteDance. So they filed a long complaint alleging, I think properly, that this is going to be an infringement on First Amendment rights. There's sort of the question about whether this is a content-neutral or content-based restriction on speech, which I'll get to in a little bit. But either way, you have to establish, at the very least, an important governmental interest, which I think national security certainly qualifies. But then the second part of the relevant test is, are the means rationally related or substantially related to achieving that end? Or would there be another way to try and protect our national security beyond taking the rather drastic action of banning an extremely popular application in our app store? So the Justice Department just filed a response brief to the original complaint in front of the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, and they are alleging that ByteDance had a search tool that allows its employees to collect information on U.S. users' views on divisive issues such as gun control, abortion, and religion. There is an internal ByteDance workplace and communications program allegedly called LARC, which connects employees in China and the United States and was used to send data on U.S. users, including personally identifiable information. So this tool, and I'm quoting from Washington Post article here, would have allowed ByteDance and TikTok employees to collect bulk user information based on the user's content or expressions, including views on gun control, abortion, or religion. I'm pretty skeptical of this argument. I have not seen the filing because the filing was almost completely redacted. There are like 3 sentences in there that aren't blacked out.
Okay.
So there's very little I can actually read on it. But my understanding is there's not exactly substantial evidence in the record as it currently exists that LARC is being used for that purpose. What the Justice Department would say is no matter whether that threat has actually materialized, Congress still has the right to pass a law to address threatened harms, even if those harms have not materialized or have not yet been detected.
Okay.
So I think if you're going to be asserting this sort of broad conspiracy to collect U.S. persons' data, you're probably going to have to assert with some level of particularity that either this is happening or this is likely to happen in the future. Otherwise, it does get unduly speculative. And the reason that's relevant is it's a pretty high bar when we're talking about a First Amendment challenge. So the government's basic position, besides this allegation about LARC, is that people don't have a First Amendment right to use TikTok. It is not chilling expression generally. It is, I think, in their interpretation, more of a time, place, and manner restriction, which are generally more constitutionally permissible. Like, you can't yell outside your neighbor's house with a bullhorn at 3 a.m. and not be cited for violating a noise ordinance. And I think that's what the Justice Department's argument here is. I'm skeptical of that argument for a couple of reasons. I think the most important is that there is no platform that allows the exact type of expression with the significant market share that TikTok has. And so I think that's more than just an incidental inhibition on speech, and that's going to be a major challenge for the Justice Department. You could go to Facebook Reels or Instagram Reels. Because TikTok is so established and there are communities and there are influencers, I think it's naive for the Justice Department to say this is solely about one isolated application and it doesn't really have a broader effect on our national conversation. I think the best proof of that is what's happened in the Kamala Harris for President campaign over the past week.
Okay.
She went on TikTok, and as opposed to President Biden, she has a bunch of influencers who are supporting her by making memes on TikTok. This whole thing about falling from a coconut tree, which I'm not going to get into, but I assume our listeners can Google it, has really spread like wildfire on TikTok, and it has amplified her political message in the first week or so of her campaign.
Huh.
So I'm just skeptical that this is going to survive a First Amendment challenge. The way the law is structured, this has to go first to the Court of Appeals. That's unusual. Usually it would go to a district court. But because of the time restraint here, the Court of Appeals is going to be the court of first impression on this. Assuming they make a decision sometime in the next couple of months, I think the Supreme Court could weigh in at least on the question of whether there should be an injunction against this law. And we could see that prior to the forced sale, which is scheduled to take place by next January. And then one last element of all of this, I think you can never take politics completely out of the story.
Right.
I think a lot of the future of TikTok is dependent on factors related to the 2 people who could be the next president. President Biden signed this ban on TikTok. I have not seen an articulated view from Vice President Harris.
Although she doesn't seem to be opposed to people using the platform.
Not at all, but neither was Biden. He set up his own TikTok account. Okay. I think it's kind of like they're contradicting their own professed views in a way.
Do as I say, not as I do.
Yeah, and it's sort of like, well, as long as this platform exists, I'm going to get out there because it is popular.
Right.
So I don't exactly know how she feels on this. All I know is that she is in the Biden administration and he signed this law. So at least she has to have some concern about the national security implications of TikTok. Then there's Donald Trump, who tried to ban TikTok when he was president. That was enjoined by a federal court. But he seemingly reversed his view on this after talking to a couple of his newfound VC friends in Silicon Valley.
Oh, yeah.
Who I think have persuaded him that TikTok should not be banned. So on its face, it seems like there is a lot at stake for TikTok's future in the November 5th presidential election. So that's another element to this lawsuit that goes unmentioned in legal filings.
So what about all the concerns, the machinations, the decoupling of TikTok from China, which, as you say, the forced sale.
Conscious uncoupling, in the words of Gwyneth Paltrow.
There you go.
Yeah, Chris Martin.
Is there? I mean, is this the area of things like sanctions, where you say, or what's the oh gosh, the term of art is escaping me now, but there's the list that the government keeps of organizations that American companies are not allowed to do business with. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I mean, is this that?
It is.
I guess what I'm asking is coming at it from that direction different or meaningfully different than the way they're coming at it, which is this, selling it off, forcing the sale of it, or perhaps even banning it?
I don't think it's meaningfully different because the effect is the same. You're prohibiting the American people from doing business with this company. You're prohibiting Google and Apple from having it available in the App Store. So it has the same effect on the type of business sanctions we often see in this realm.
Yeah.
The difference here, I think, is TikTok's own popularity. Some of these companies that are forbidden from doing business in the United States due to various State Department policies are very obscure to most Americans. That might be prevalent among our adversaries in Russia or China.
Yeah.
But it's not like the main social media platform that's driving our national conversation.
Right. I'm thinking of Kaspersky, which is a cybersecurity company that is headquartered in Moscow. They recently announced that they're closing down their U.S. division, laying everybody off and, locking the doors because the federal government has said, if you're in the U.S., you can't do business with Kaspersky, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think this would be the equivalent to that. I think it's perhaps a legal distinction without a real practical difference. The practical difference, of course, is the popularity of TikTok. And if you were to do a nationwide survey comparing just the pure recognition of TikTok versus Kaspersky, I figure it would be a very big difference between the percentage of people who know about TikTok.
Well, and is there any where does the First Amendment come in with this? Is Kaspersky being a cybersecurity company, there's really no First Amendment argument to be made where I can see them, and they are trying to make one with TikTok, because it is a place of free expression.
It is, yeah. I think that makes a huge difference, and I think that could be determinative in this lawsuit. With Kaspersky, there is a such thing as associational rights. That doesn't carry the same constitutional weight when we're talking about a major forum for the freedom of expression.
I see.
Because TikTok is a very expressive platform. Now, a lot of very weird and probably not that important things are expressed on there. I'm sure our society would have survived without seeing thousands of videos of the Hakatua girl.
Okay.
Nothing against her. If she wants to be a guest on this show, I'm all ears. But that doesn't mean that TikTok doesn't play a major role in our marketplace of ideas. And the evidence we've seen in this political campaign, I think, is quite compelling that this is, even beyond what Twitter ever was, a new town square, a way for people to express themselves. It's had an influence on our national conversation. How that manifests itself in a potential legal holding is sort of hard to foresee, but I think it's going to have to do with finding the least restrictive means of achieving the goal of protecting our national security. It's a lot harder to say that this is the least restrictive means when we're talking about such a prominent and important application that everybody uses.
All right. Well, it's one to keep an eye on for sure, and we will do that. We will do so.
Absolutely.
I'll have a link to that story from the Washington Post in our show notes. I have a story from TechCrunch, and this has been covered broadly all over the place. This is a ruling from a federal district court in New York, which has ruled that U.S. border agents must obtain a warrant before searching electronic devices of Americans and international travelers. Can I just say hallelujah?
Yeah, this one was surprising to me. I have to admit it. And granted, we don't know what's going to happen here on appeal. There's a lot of conflicting case law about digital searches at the border.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, take the victory lap, Dave.
Well, I obviously, I'm saying that this is something that you and I have talked about over and over again here, and I think it's fair to say both of us have been left scratching our heads the degree of flexibility that Customs and Border Patrol people have at the border for searching our devices. And I think the argument here is that your mobile device is a different category than your suitcase.
And this is well founded in case law. If you look at Riley v. California, that's exactly what the Supreme Court said. It is essentially a part of our bodies. It contains such a rich tapestry of personal information that it's in a different category entirely. Now, look back at that Riley v. California case. What the Supreme Court was saying in that case is normally you do not need a warrant for a search incident to an arrest. So if somebody is arrested based on properly predicated evidence, you can search their car, you can search their wallet. The justification there is obvious. You want to keep law enforcement safe. And as long as you reasonably have somebody in your custody, you might as well see if they have contraband that you can use to convict them in court. What the Supreme Court said in Riley is cell phones are different. Cell phones are different because of the wealth of personal information contained therein. Now, with border searches, I think the same sort of intellectual exercise is taking place here in this case. Normally, there is a lesser Fourth Amendment standard for searches at the border. This is what's known as the special needs doctrine. Normally, you wouldn't be able to search somebody without any indicia of suspicion because that would be a Fourth Amendment violation. But there is a special governmental need to search people as they cross our border to protect our national security, to make sure people are not bringing in drugs or, whatever somebody might bring into the country. But I think what this district court opinion is saying is, once again, cell phones are different. It is a window into a person's life. And this is basically an extension of the Riley decision to the question of digital searches at the border. I think it's a welcome decision in that respect. I'm just very curious to see what the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, which is based in New York, does once this case makes it to that panel.
Yeah, this article says it's not clear yet if the federal prosecutors will appeal the decision. I suspect they probably will. Don't you think?
I definitely think they
count
will.
on it.
I mean, I'm sure there's sufficient value in these digital border searches. They've probably discovered a lot of really useful information through the use of warrantless border searches that this is something that they're going to try to defend in court. So I would suspect they will appeal this to the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. Right now, this is only applicable in the district court where it was decided in New York. So it does apply to JFK Airport, LaGuardia, Newark, I believe. So if you're flying into the tri-state area, feel free to go crazy with that contraband on your digital device. If you happen to be going anywhere else in the country,
right,
I would still be rather cautious.
And hope that your flight doesn't get rerouted.
Exactly. Wouldn't that be the nightmare? It's like somebody's following our district court cases closely and they're like, I found a loophole. Fly into the tri-state area. No, we're diverting to Logan. No!
This article points out that Customs and Border Patrol conducted over 41,000 device searches in 2023. That's a lot.
Seems like a lot, yeah.
And so it makes me wonder if you have the requirement for a warrant here, would that number fall off a cliff? I suspect it would.
Totally.
Yeah.
Because for the vast majority of these devices, there is no indication of any individualized suspicion.
Okay.
There's just not. I mean, it's hard to get information. It's hard to get any level of information that would justify a warrant, especially if you're like conducting these searches somewhat randomly. And I don't know exactly how they decide which devices to search. But yeah, once you actually have to prove it to obtain a warrant, that you have some evidence that there's some useful information on that digital device, it's going to be much harder. And I think if this decision was applied nationwide, and eventually the Supreme Court's going to have to weigh in here because there's enough conflicting case law on it. But if this is applied nationwide, that 41,000 is going to go way down. I think we're going to be talking about 4 digits instead of 5 digits.
So for something like this to spread its way across the U.S., I mean, would this be a district by district effort here, where as it is ruled upon in each district, the rules would be different in each district, and then ultimately it gets appealed to the Supreme Court because of those differences? Exactly.
Okay. So tentatively, it is district by district, depending on the jurisdiction of the district court that makes the decision. So once it gets up to the circuit court, if the circuit court affirms the district court's decision, then everywhere in the Second Circuit, there will be a warrant requirement for digital searches at border crossings.
And how big an area
let's be
are
honest,
we talking
when
about?
we're talking about New York City, border crossings means airports. This isn't the Ellis Island era.
Right.
I will say, though, if we're talking about the full Second Circuit, we're getting up to the Canadian border.
Okay.
Because I believe it would include all of New York State. So up by that, near Plattsburgh, if I know my New York State technology, it would certainly apply there as well. But yeah, if there is enough of a split, and we have seen conflicting case law on this, then the Supreme Court could choose to take the case and resolve this issue once and for all. I'll note we're on a very long streak of the Supreme Court not taking Fourth Amendment cases, going on like 3 or 4 years now. It's been bad for the content of this show. So
poor Professor Kerr.
I know. I mean, he is losing sleep over this. And I think it would be good for us to have a Fourth Amendment case there. It'd be great. Yeah. It would be great for content.
If it happens, we'll have to do a special edition.
Yeah, we'll have to do a breaking segment. Send out the bat signal for me.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, we will have a link to that story in the show notes. And of course, we would love to hear from you. If there's something you'd like us to consider for the show, you can email us. It's caveat@n2k.com. The IT world used to be simpler. You only had to secure and manage environments that you controlled. Then came new technologies and new ways to work. Now, employees, apps, and networks are everywhere. This means poor visibility, security gaps, and added risk. That's why Cloudflare created the first-ever connectivity cloud. Visit cloudflare.com to protect your business everywhere you do business. Ben, you recently had the pleasure of speaking with U.S. congressional candidate from Oklahoma, Madison Horn. Let's hear that conversation.
Welcome to the show. I wanted to see if you could give us some background about how you got into the field of cybersecurity and how it informs your career right now.
Yeah, well, first off, thanks for having me on. As it relates to just me getting into the world of cybersecurity, it was entirely non-traditional, and I feel like I kind of fell into the world of cyber. You know, I'm from a small town called Stillwell, Oklahoma. It has the lowest life expectancy in the United States. As you can imagine, some of the economic statistics there that are huge drivers, and then just, overall health outcomes. Anyways, so that's where I'm from originally. So I was really just seeking opportunity outside of my town, outside of my state. And, I was working actually at the Boys and Girls Club at the time. I was in high school, just about to graduate and trying to figure out what the hell I was going to do with my life. I had found a lot of healing working for the Boys and Girls Club. In short, some statistics I can give you quickly. you know, 49% of women in Oklahoma experience domestic violence or rape. It's the worst place in the United States for women. 68% of women are unemployed in my hometown. And so there just wasn't a place for me there. And so, you know, obviously the Boys and Girls Club offering a place of like healing, and I was teaching classes there. Then the headquarters of the Boys and Girls Club is in Atlanta, Georgia. So I received my first tax return and I drove a 26-foot U-Haul to Atlanta, Georgia. I had no idea what the hell I put in it at this point, but thought that I was going to go work for the headquarters there. Never did, because nothing goes as planned. But I was studying Homeland Security at Georgia Military College, and I was studying business. And one of my odd and end jobs was a front desk person at a hotel. And as cybersecurity professionals do, we're constantly traveling, constantly on the move. There was a group of folks traveling to my hotel. I got to know them, and after 6 months, they offered me a job in the world of security. I kind of make this terrible joke. I was like, you want me to work in security? I'm only 5'5". Like, how is that possible? And they were like, no, computers. And I'm like, also still confused. But yeah, that's kind of like how I got into the world of cyber. I just this random interaction.
I've asked this question in many interviews, and that is by far the most interesting origin story I've ever heard on how somebody got into cybersecurity, which just piques my interest. So as you developed in this industry, in this field, what started to keep you up at night in terms of the threat landscape? I think we can kind of divide that into the micro threats you might have dealt with working in the security industry, so how to protect an individual business or grandma from a phishing email, but also as you started to learn more about policy, the threats to things like critical infrastructure.
Yeah. So two things here. So one, you know, being from the middle of the country, then, you know, primarily our veterans, our military service members come from the heartland, right? And so I was born with just this like really deep sense of service. Always thought that I would join the military. Obviously, that's not the route that I chose. But when I kind of stumbled into the world of cyber, then it really pulled at that desire to protect. And, you know, when I first started working in cyber, then I was actually, you know, in rural substations and nuclear power facilities. I kind of make joke, if I have kids, I'm going to end up like bringing back like real live X-Men and X-Women. Like it's going to come true. I hope they're cool and glow green or something. But, you know, there was this like humbling moment, no joke, when I first stood outside of the nuclear stack. And I just had this very humbling moment because we've all seen Chernobyl, right, on HBO. And I was just like, oh my God. And that realization that our critical infrastructure is so frail, then I don't know, it was just this like real call to action and pull for me. And so my entire career within the cyber world has always been tied to critical infrastructure and just really trying to understand the problem set because it's obviously so unique and people just don't understand it. You know, we could dive into a number of issues of the why, but you know, the things that kept me up at night, you know, I would say foreign adversaries, you know, creating real life scenarios like Chernobyl in the United States. Those are the things that kept me up at night. And then I think, you know, living in the world of 2024 where we have AI, and I think that we're on the cusp of like even quantum computing becoming a real deal thing. And we're looking at a year where 2 billion people are going to be voting this year. That terrifies me just because of the strong desire for our adversaries here in the United States and against other countries to really create havoc, whether that's for destabilization or to erode public trust, etc. So I would say those are the two biggest things that keep me up tonight. A major disaster within the critical infrastructure space, and then just what we're seeing in the political landscape.
For sure. And before I get to how you see us addressing those problems in the most effective way, I'll note you are a candidate for Congress in Oklahoma's 5th district, the fighting 5th, as Stephen Colbert used to say. And I think we've all watched hearings in Congress, like when Mark Zuckerberg comes and you see members ask questions that reveal a certain level of ignorance about technological issues. Can you talk a little bit about that, and even just beyond yourself, what knowledge our policymakers need to have to kind of address the threats you mentioned that keep you up at night?
Yeah, I think the most recent, there was a hearing maybe like 3 weeks ago where there was a sitting member that brought the Hacking for Dummies book and was like waving it around in committee. And I was like, it irks me and it just makes me giggle. But like being on the other end of it, it just makes you actually cringe and terrified that these are the individuals that are actually pushing policy forward. We can't expect every sitting member of Congress to be an expert in cybersecurity. But what I think that we should expect is the expectation that they're not going to demonize the tech sector and actually learn to collaborate and create partnerships. I think that is first and foremost, just because, if we don't have right fit policy, then we're, no longer going to be a global power, whether that be from an economic perspective, and risk leaving a lot of people behind just because we don't understand how to build modern policy. So I guess that's the first and foremost, I guess, just not demonizing the sector. I would say second, don't undermine the threat and don't undermine it by fear mongering, because I think in a space that is so hard for people to understand, then the fear mongering takes out of account that these threats are real and they can have widespread impact that people just don't comprehend or think that is actually possible when it is. And so it makes, I think, cybersecurity professionals' job much harder when it's already hard for us to articulate it to boards or C-suite, et cetera. I would say those are my top two.
That makes a lot of sense. And in terms of where you think policy needs to develop over the next several years, regardless of which policymakers are in Washington, particularly with the newfound opportunities and threats that come with AI and quantum computing, what do you foresee as our most ambitious and important policy goals over the next several years?
Sure. I think what CISA is doing is incredibly, like, it's a really great start and framework. But what I would like to see is more education being done at the very, very local level, because realistically, the top down isn't going to work. We're going to have to start education within, our local schools, within our local community centers, and just doing rescaling, like digital scaling, and understanding the importance of data privacy and the personal ownership that we have to protect our individual data, which will overarching uplift us as a country to just be more resilient. I would say that. I kind of touched a little bit on rescaling, complete overhaul and just like what our workforce development looks like, what public education looks like, what our 4-year degree programs look like. Here in Oklahoma, we have one of the strongest vocational systems in the United States with wait list of 200 and 300 people, which is insane. We have people wanting to seek opportunity, but there's not enough funding for these schools to actually educate the people that are seeking to better themselves. So that's highly frustrating. And just like, what type of opportunities are we looking at in the future? I hear a lot of conversation around bringing manufacturing jobs to states like Oklahoma and just the rural heartland in general. And with AI, with automation, we're talking about jobs that are robotic engineers, data scientists. And, what does that look like in a state like Oklahoma, where we're ranked 51st in education?
Yeah, it's like it doesn't have the same image of manufacturing or coal mining that you would see in an advertisement, but it's perhaps more important to have a strong workforce in these rapidly developing fields.
For sure. I mean, I think it's both for economic stability as a country, right? But also, again, like empowering a large swath of the country that we haven't done development in.
Right, exactly. I'm glad you mentioned K through 12 education, because I just think that's such an area of neglect. Getting people in on the ground floor and learning about basic cyber hygiene and the threat to our own personal data. And as somebody with a 7 and 5-year-old, it's certainly something that I think about all the time. In terms of a more macro level, what our country needs to do to address some of these malign foreign actors, to harden our systems. Can you talk a little bit about what your preferred policies would be in that realm?
So I'm going to stick to the just critical infrastructure, to be honest, because it is what keeps me up at night, right? As we're making this transition to, a diverse ecosystem of different energy sources, I would love to see more investment in the green energy space. I think this is a zero-sum game in competing with China. And, we have to come to the realization that, climate change is real. If we continue to not make the investments, then we're going to find ourselves in the same situation that we were in 20 years ago, and that is building our critical infrastructure with products made with spyware in them or or back doors. And so I would just like for us to kind of think about supply chain issues, what that risk looks like, how we're doing investments. Because of how fragile the grid is now, we're going to have to figure out what does U.S. investment look like for these companies while we also protect rate increases. And I think this is going to be a generational problem that we have to solve. We're going to have to get more comfortable, I think, with nuclear energy. This isn't, 9 Mile Island anymore, 2 Mile Island anymore, right?
3 Mile Island, I believe.
Yeah, I'm like 9, 3, 4, 6.
Yep.
Forgive me. I've got numbers running through my head. That's what I would like to see, like people actually sitting down and thinking about the whole problem set.
I don't get the opportunity to interview political candidates very much. I think one thing that makes me curious is, how do you raise the salience of an issue like cybersecurity in a campaign when, to be honest, most people just don't care and don't see it as an imminent threat or an acute threat in their own lives? How do you raise the salience of an issue like that to get people to care in the context of a political campaign?
Sure. I'm going to challenge you.
Okay, let's do it.
People do care. People do care. But we have to, just like we're talking to a board, just like we're talking to someone who doesn't necessarily understand cyber, doesn't necessarily understand data analytics, right? Then you have to make it relatable. It's so funny. Like when I talk about data analytics and, how asset inventory products work, then I always would talk about candies and talk about Skittles or gummy bears or something of that nature, and how it creates correlations. And so, when we're talking about a complex issue like cybersecurity, then, you brought up protecting grandma from getting spammed, right? Yeah, that may seem like a maybe not that big of an issue, but let's talk about the economic impact to grandmother if her entire life savings was stolen. And now let's elevate that one step further. How is that money being used by an adversary, right? And how that is being then turned against the United States and potentially used to actually attack us as a country or to fund wars, in Russia, Ukraine, right? And so I think it's just making things relatable, whether that is talking to parents about the importance of online safety, human trafficking, child trafficking. People are most susceptible, or children are most susceptible at the age of 12 years old. And that is all, I don't want to say all, but a lot of that is happening online. And so how do we protect some of our most vulnerable, and talking about it in that context?
I'm glad you pushed back against me, because I think I can be too cynical about this stuff. And it's good to hear that you've thought about ways to make this more concrete and relatable to people who don't live and breathe cybersecurity.
Of course, like to farmers and talking about ag, talking to folks who work in local water systems, right? It's all about contextualizing it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we'll hear stories like John Deere fighting against right to repair for tractors. It's like there is a cyber angle for everything. So, yeah, I think we can be evangelists for that for that concept. Madison Horn, thank you for joining us on the Caveat Podcast.
Interesting stuff, Ben. And I have to say, one of the things that strikes me about this conversation is that when a congressional hopeful is making the rounds, have we reached the point where this is one of the topics that has to be on their list? They have to be able to speak coherently, intelligently, and have a plan when it comes to cybersecurity and how it affects national security. Or do you think we're at that point?
No.
No? So you think we're in the bubble here?
I think the reason she's talking about it is because she has a very impressive resume and she's worked on these issues throughout her professional career. And I loved hearing her origin story about how it kind of happened accidentally.
Yeah.
I think it's great that we have a select number of candidates who are raising the profile of this issue. I don't think this is a litmus test yet at the congressional level. I'm hoping that if we have more massive cybersecurity incidents, if it's CrowdStrike times a million and outages are affecting everybody in the United States, then that might be something that the voters demand. She challenged me on that. I have a very cynical view of it that a very select number of nerds currently care about these issues. And I think she appropriately pushed back on that and said that that's changing. And I'm persuaded by it.
I think that's right. Although I would say I think people are concerned about the fallout from those issues more than the issues themselves. They would just want the lights to stay on.
Exactly.
They
don't care about,
It doesn't matter to them, that CrowdStrike had a bug. They're just concerned that the lights went off.
Right. Why is my Delta flight delayed?
Exactly.
They don't need to know the full history about the CrowdStrike update.
Right. And they roll their eyes and say, oh, computers. Bad idea. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks so much to Madison Horn for joining us. Once again, she is a U.S. congressional candidate from Oklahoma. We appreciate her taking the time for us. And now a message from Black Cloak. What's the easiest way for threat actors to bypass your company's cyber defenses? Targeting your executives at home. That's because 87% of executives use personal devices to conduct business, often with zero security measures in place. Once execs leave your organization's secure network, they become easy targets for hijacking, credential theft, and reputational harm. Close the at-home security gap with Black Cloak Concierge Cybersecurity and Privacy. Award-winning 24/7, 365 protection for executives and their families. Learn more at blackcloak.io. That is our show, brought to you by N2K Cyberwire. We'd love to know what you think of this podcast. Your feedback ensures we deliver the insights that keep you a step ahead in the rapidly changing world of cybersecurity. If you like our show, please share a rating and review in your favorite podcast app. Please also fill out the survey in the show notes or send an email to caveat@n2k.com. We're privileged that N2K Cyberwire is part of the daily routine of the most influential leaders and operators in the public and private sector, from the Fortune 500 to many of the world's preeminent intelligence and law enforcement agencies. N2K makes it easy for companies to optimize your biggest investment, your people. We make you smarter about your teams while making your teams smarter. Learn how at n2k.com. This episode is produced by Liz Stokes. Our executive producer is Jennifer Iben. The show is mixed by Trey Hester. Our executive editor is Brandon Karpf. Peter Kilpie is our publisher. I'm Dave Bittner.
And I'm Ben Yellen.
Thanks for listening.